Welcome to Transform Now, brought to you by SSNC, where we explore the future of work through the lens of AI. Across industries, leaders are rethinking strategy, culture, and operations to harness AI's full potential. This podcast gives you the insights and ideas to transform your organization, stay competitive, and thrive in a world driven by change. Let's get into the show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. I'm your host, Michael Marchuk, and welcome here. We've got a wonderful guest today. His name's Tim Shea. He's a technology and AI leader known for helping organizations move from early experimentation to scalable enterprise-grade programs. Tim has worked across strategy, engineering, and operating model design with a focus on applying AIs in ways that actually deliver measurable value. So his work emphasizes not just models and tools, but the organizational systems required to make AI durable and trustworthy. Today, we'll be exploring what it really takes to build an agentic AI program inside of a modern enterprise. So welcome, Tim.
Thanks so much for having me, Michael. Really appreciate it.
I'm super glad you're here because you've got some background that really dives more into the practical, and that's kind of stuff that we've seen a lot of blog posts about how wonderful AI is and all the magic that can happen. But I suspect you've got some more real life stories that you can bring to bear to make it more real. But first of all, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So look, my name is Tim. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called Latticework Insights. We build technology to help brands sort of reconnect all of their data assets. We centralize their data. We help them create a new lens, through which to see their business. That lens that oftentimes unlocks some sort of, inflection point in their growth, some sort of transformation in the business that they had been, previously unable to achieve. We work with awesome elite brands, we call them, folks like Sweetgreen, the NBA, UFC, Reddit, Gemini, you name it. I say elite brands because these are brands that are sort of ready, right? They've maybe felt a bit of a stalemate in their organization. They're ready for change. They're willing to put their human, people behind that initiative. They're willing to put their money behind that. They really want to transform their companies and sort of drive into the future. So super fun stuff. We work a lot on the qual side. What is the motivation that a consumer goes through to buy a product, as well as a lot on the quant side. So what is your customer lifetime value? Are you paying too much? Is your CAC too high based on the LTV that you're getting from customers? And how can we basically change some of those dynamics to help companies, make more money, be more profitable, and grow like crazy?
I think most companies would appreciate that. So let's set the stage here and talk about agentic AI. So the term agentic AI has been used in a bunch of different ways. How do you define agentic AI systems inside of an organization, and what capabilities or capacities must be present before you can confidently say that you're using that label?
Yeah, I actually really love that question. I think AI, specifically generative AI, specifically large language models, right? It's like the most amazing thing, Michael, that you and I have seen in 20 years' time, maybe in our whole lifetimes. The only problem with AI is that it doesn't work. And so it fails to, companies fail to get agentic initiatives into production for a variety of reasons. Hallucination is one of them. The models hallucinate. Hallucination does not seem to be going away. Modern models, it feels like they're sort of like shuffling the deck every new version of a model that comes out. Hallucination is a huge problem for folks that are reporting data to Wall Street, for example. They can't get that wrong. Things that are really high stakes, where the tolerance for risk is really low. The agentic use cases or agentic output is oftentimes dead on arrival. There needs to be some sort of human checks and balances before things go out to production. I think there's this huge conversation about people talking about, should we put a human in the middle of this agentic workflow that we are building? And it's such an odd framing because it feels like, have the agents really earned the right? Should we have agents in the middle? Potentially, like our agents are making all these mistakes. They make mistakes with arithmetic. If they don't have enough context, they fill in the gaps and they start saying things that are just fluffy or incorrect or just, wildly off base. And I think a lot of people are really confused right now because what they read in the Wall Street Journal is that this thing's taken over. It's going to replace human jobs. Every CEO on the block is out there building some sort of successful agentic implementation inside of their company. And yet when they sit in front of the LLMs on their keyboard, they're like, this is strange that it just made up the name of a book, or it just totally hallucinated this metric. And it totally went around all the guardrails that we had set up for it. What do we do, Tim? What are we missing? And so there's education gap and a lot of upskilling that we're seeing out there. And the biggest missing piece is really leadership. We need human leaders to make these AI tools work before it can go into production.
So yeah, let's kind of pull on that thread a little bit. So we've seen a ton of organizations who have started up, spun up a bunch of different pilots. They're kind of dipping their toe in, trying to figure things out. When you start looking at them, you can see that they're really trying to get things to work. But in your experience, what are the key shifts that are required to go from this toe dipping exercise into a full production kind of mode?
Yeah, that's right. I think there's a question of whether, I'll go back to the LLM in the middle component. I think there's a big question whether you want that type of intelligence in the application. And so let's unpack that. What does that mean? So LLMs are amazing when you ask them really open-ended questions. They behave like humans. They give really interesting, nuanced perspectives. They can be very unexpected responses. They sound really, really intelligent. For a lot of the stuff that we used to do in the data world around like unstructured data, where it was very frustrating to take a PDF document or a photograph and try and jam it into a database, like how do I represent this thing? LLMs are great at that. They're amazing at just sort of interpreting these unstructured pieces of content that you give them. When you want to, after you've meticulously modeled all of your data, there's a question of like, well, who's going to present that in the room? Right? The software is terrible at like creating a breathtaking narrative. Well, LLMs are amazing at that. They'll just, they'll wow everyone's, knock everyone's socks off with some breathtaking narrative. It can sound like someone who is excellent at presenting in front of an executive board. But there's a big question of like, is that always needed? And someone says, oh, I have some agentic workflow I want to put in place. I want to take this data, I want to move it from point A, and I want to get it to point B really safely. And I'm like, well, what am I missing here? Where is the role of an intelligent LLM in that case? Why don't you just use the old school tools, which can confidently take a piece of data, move it from A to B, and do it the same way every time and not introduce a lot of, non-determinism in the middle. And so I think it's the first place for people to start is like, do you have a use case that needs this particular thing? Or are you doing it just because you're reading about it in the trades? I think it's a great place for everyone to start.
So that is something that I'm very interested in talking through, maybe a little more depth, because we've seen the same type of thing going from, hey, we've got an RPA in place here. It seems like it's running pretty well here, but we want to extend and expand what we're doing. Or we've got these other automations that we've built over the past X number of years through Python scripts and whatnot. Let's just make those agentic, right? How can you tell when a specific use case really needs to be agentic versus, this really just keep this as something that's more traditional automation?
Yeah. So it's a great question. So let's say with analytics, right, there's always a bunch of things that you have to do analytics right that you just are just dreading doing, right? And I'll run through them, right? So you obviously have to fetch the data. People have data living in 10, 20, 30, 50 different platforms. Their data's locked up in all these SaaS places. You got to get the data out. Someone then needs to model that data just so. And say, okay, I'm spending on Google and Facebook and TikTok and influencer and print and television. These are all very different types of advertising. Someone needs to model that stuff very carefully. They're selling on Shopify, Amazon, Sephora, Walmart, you name it. Each of those types of transactions looks a little bit different. Someone needs to model that. Now you get to the fun part. Someone needs to interpret the data. Someone needs to create some breathtaking narrative that knocks people's socks off and moves the ball forward. Everyone should know the number is X and the action item is Y. Let's go. There's also a need to evaluate the data, whether it's correct. And we've done all this, move data from A to B to C to D. Let's just double check real quick that these numbers for January 1st are actually correct. So in those 4 places, you can see agents playing a role. You can see there being an orchestrator agent that does data extraction, a separate agent that does the modeling, a separate agent that does the interpretation, a separate agent that does the evaluation. And I think people just need to pause real quickly and think, well, where specifically is the agent going to succeed? Is it really as simple as writing a markdown file that says, go fetch me this data from these 10 APIs? Or is it maybe more effective for me just to tell Claude Code, could you please write the code in this specific way? I'm going to encode my 20 years of domain expertise in doing data extraction and doing ETL into writing deterministic code. Just the computer will actually type the code for me. And then you got to think about, well, with the modeling, like, is it really good at modeling? Is there maybe data that's coming out that's really hard for humans to model? Maybe it's the PDF or the photograph or the video or some sort of unstructured survey data. And maybe the interpretation part, that's I think maybe where it gets exciting. It's like, maybe the LLMs are just amazing at interpreting the data, and that's where it can replace human beings. That's where the agents can be quite successful. And then last but not least is the sort of evaluation component. And maybe the LLMs can like figure out whether or not they made a mistake along the way. And people quickly get this moment where they're scratching their heads and being like, am I going to use an LLM as a judge to judge the situation where another LLM made the judgment? Like, maybe we should have a human on the evaluation side. And so you can see how the excitement around, I'm going to build a swarm of agents, an orchestrator, an extractor, a modeler, an interpreter, and an evaluator, to like, well, maybe the agent only belongs in like 1.5 of those cases. And if I do, I just need to make sure a human being really triple checks their work. So I think like, AI generated code is very, very exciting as long as a human being is behind it, driving it and writing the code. And it can make a lot of those things much more stable and deterministic. But those swarms, I think, are really promising. But anytime someone says swarm, I think about all the complexity that they are creating and who's going to make sure that all the complexity is behaving.
Right. Well, you talk about swarming, looking at these acting as a system across tools and kind of processes to make this happen. When you're looking at that basic workflow, we humans generally decide what is going to happen in our organization and why. We want to do this particular thing. You talk about go get this data, do the evaluations, create the presentation, and interpret it. Those steps that you mentioned earlier. That's something that we've determined. We humans have determined as the appropriate process or workflow that we're going to manage. When you unleash a swarm, they don't necessarily have to follow that particular set of guidelines, do they? And if they're not, how do we rein them back in?
Yeah, look, I think this is where I always come back to the chorus of leadership. I think like really smart people need to figure this out. I do believe AI is transformational. I do believe it doesn't work yet. And I believe for it to work, like we need human leaders to kind of solve a lot of these problems to push things forward. One of the amazing things, if you're going to lean into a swarm, one of the amazing things about LLMs is they can explore a potentially infinite compute space on our behalf. We can imbue dimensionality in our work that we could not have done with just a bunch of human beings sitting around. So maybe the swarms can do is they can explore more options and report back what they found to humans. A gentleman said to the other day, he goes, a lot of managing swarms of agents or consortiums of agents is a lot like organizational behavior. If you remember, folks said, okay, well, we need to have like a manager with a certain amount of reports, and there's human resources over here making sure people kind of behave in a certain way. And I got a finance person that's holding marketing accountable, and the CTO is trying to be the voice of reason. And so maybe there's something there where there's a hierarchy or a sort of organizational structure that we can put around the agents. And this gentleman said to me, he goes, we also want to be careful that like maybe they know things that we haven't thought of yet. Maybe we are trying to prescribe to them how humans can work with humans effectively, but maybe there are other ways that agents can work with agents more effectively. So I think a lot of that is we're in this sort of experimentation phase of like, what does it look like to have like a junior, a manager, a director, a VP agent interacting with each other, and maybe they should have different titles. So I think there's a lot of, TBD around where we're going to end up with swarms.
Well, that actually brings us to an interesting kind of duality. We've got a human organization and then a agentic organization. Obviously, roles are going to have to change on both sides here, both from the agents and the humans. So what kind of structures do you see evolving or emerging as an agentic program takes shape and becomes more mature?
Yeah. I'll start with a story. So Sequoia Capital runs this messaging a lot about the future of the one-person company. And they say, listen, you can see how you can get a swarm of agents to solve a very small domain of tasks. And as we get better at it, you can see how it might handle a whole bunch of things that might constitute every task in a company. And really smart human beings might sit at the top. It might be able to run a 10x organization with just one human being. And it's a really exciting, exhilarating vision for the future. I like to think of, to help people go from crawl to walk to run, to think of LLM as a bit of like a prism. And so you imagine your organization, to oversimplify, maybe you have like a lot of above average folks, you got a bunch of average folks, and let's say you got a bunch of below average folks. When above average folks work with AI tools, they can produce 10 times more super interesting output, really advanced stuff. These are people that prior to AI would have made a dent in the universe, regardless if AI was there or not. Entrepreneurs, executives, successful, like really, really smart folks. Average folks can also produce 10 times more average stuff in the company. I think of it like, stucco and drywall, right? You only need so much drywall and stucco in your house, right? Before you're like, okay, I think we're good here. And so there's a little bit of a need to upskill, those average folks. And then certainly there's below average folks. And below average folks are vibe coding themselves into a corner. They are burning tokens. They're wasting a lot of time. And they're producing 10 times as much below average stuff and filling organizations with, toxic fumes effectively. And so there's a real delta between what the capabilities that are out there and what people are able to absorb. Another great analogy I've heard is people say like, this sort of hammer looking for a nail. The hammer is a beautiful tool for a couple reasons. One of which is it does not require an instruction manual. If you give your hammer to my, 2-year-olds, they're going to run around the house and start like smashing things. They don't need to read the sort of like IKEA, directions beforehand. If you look at the delta between like what the models can do, and if you take the average Fortune 500 CEOs like chat history with ChatGPT, there's a massive delta of them getting frustrated and them sort of driving the agents into a ditch and what the models are actually capable of. So what I see is that there's this huge chasm. We need to get smart leaders in there to sort of close that chasm between like what the models are capable of and what's actually manifesting inside of companies.
Does that mean that the, say, average or below average employee in these cases here have to re-engineer themselves, or is there a way for the organizations themselves to be able to reposition those people in places where perhaps they might not necessarily be below average anymore?
Sure. That's a great question. There's been a lot of chatter around data is the new oil, right? Or compute is the new oil.
As long as there's no Strait of Hormuz for it, we're good.
As long as there's infinite supply, right? We need infinite supply of oil. I think another scarce resource is domain expertise. So I think, domain expertise is the new oil. And I think there's folks that have been doing this for like 5, 10, 20, 30 years. And I think their voice matters more than ever. And you think about, there used to be this old joke of like, what do you do with a software engineer when they turn 40? And you take them out back and shoot them, right? They're just, you can't do anything with them. Those people are more important than ever because they have all these design principles. They know how to build and test and maintain software. They understand what executives want. And so I think there's an opportunity for people to shift around an organization. If you think like maybe the silos between specialties are maybe crumbling a little bit, me as a software developer, I can go like make videos with AI, or a marketing person can go write code with AI, or attorneys can go, put their cold and flu symptoms into an AI and diagnose themselves. And so I think there's a lot of mobility that AI is creating for folks. But I think first and foremost is like domain expertise is the thing that should be exalted right now. And I think, leaders have a real opportunity to figure out maybe this person is not going to thrive in this role. Let's move them over to another area where we can support them in a new way.
So building a new agentic capability, we've got these wonderful tools. Maybe we've got some really, really smart people who've grasped a hold of them and they're taking them forward. Beyond the whole efficiency or cost reduction plays, which a lot of CFOs love to focus on, what metrics do you recommend for an average organization to be really focused in on to see if they're actually improving quality, speed, learning, actual outcomes? What kind of metrics should they be looking at?
Yeah, no, I think outcomes is the place to start. Look, I mean, if I were run the tape 10 years ago, everyone in my industry was talking about the modern data stack. Everyone said, listen, I got data spread out in all of these different places. I need to bring in Fivetran to bring data into a Snowflake warehouse. I need to put Tableau on top of it to create these data visualizations. And, in my head, I'm like, okay, cool, this is amazing. I can't wait to see what we're going to do with the data. And everyone was just like, no, the modern data stack is just like a checklist. We bought the modern data stack. I'm going to take it to my VCs. We're going to raise our A round now and our B round. They think we're ready for the future. And you're like, well, hold on one second. All you did was pay my fee and build this technology. It's not going to do anything for you. So maybe you got some reps in, we built this thing, and that's good for the organization. But like, what was it that we were trying to do in the first place? Right? We were trying to increase the amount of value we get out of a customer over their lifetime, right? We're trying to reduce the amount we pay for them. We're scratching our heads thinking, we gave these customers a huge discount on Black Friday. Like, are they ever going to come back again? Are they just going to wait for the next Black Friday sale before they come back to our store? And everyone says, well, we built an agentic workflow. You're like, okay, that's great. Like, it's very exciting that we built the workflow. Like, what were we hoping to get out of that exercise? So maybe earmarking some of the tokens for education, I think, is a really smart piece. And earmarking some of the budget for, someone to come in and teach everyone to fish. But I think there's a lot of things where people say, you know what, we've been stuck trying to get this unstructured data into our data models. And it's just the darndest problem. And we have this huge team wrestling with this. I'm like, well, hold on a second. I think we maybe found an area where these agents can be really, really effective. And they can lower the time and the cost and the effort to produce that stuff. But let's not neglect how much maybe more prolific we can make the teams, right? Some of these teams can now do more things. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that they can do is they can burn through more tokens. So that's not an outcome, right? Hopefully we can create more functionality for users. We can get through more customer service tickets. We can do product development faster and more efficiently. So I think that added dimensionality, added just a sense of being prolific in the organization are things that people can be thinking about in the very short term, right? They should be able to see those results pretty quickly.
So given that, do you have an example, without giving any customer names, that where this is something that you've seen and been able to transform?
Yeah. Oh my God, totally. It's so exciting when it works. So I have a company, a client. They're a huge restaurant chain. You can imagine their data pipeline, right? Global restaurant chain, right? It's massive. The ETL process makes lots of mistakes, right? It's hard getting data through this huge Rube Goldberg machine into the dashboard. And so A/B testing has been a huge challenge. And so we coalesced around a model for A/B testing the pipeline to make sure that the data that people saw in dashboards they could rely on, they could act on it. But it's hard getting big organizations rallied around one thing. It takes a while. It took a couple months to get everyone to agree, today is Monday, right? Can everyone agree today is 11:24 in the morning on a Monday morning? Okay, we got it. And you say, watch this. Now that we've coalesced around this model, hey, agent, can you copy what we've done here? Can you take this pattern? Hey, can you roll it out into the 35 other data sources that need to be tested? We need unit tests for all of them. And the agent in 5 minutes, right? What took a human being 3 weeks of work now rolls out 30 other unit tests for all these other data pipelines. And we said, everyone agreed today is Monday, right? Look at what we did. We created 30 versions of Monday. And then we had all the humans go through and make sure that it hadn't made any mistakes. And everyone said, oh my goodness, in a very short time frame, our confidence in our data quality just went through the roof. And so now when we have a dashboard, all the executives in the room, and someone says, hey, our LTV is 100, everyone can say, everyone believes that's 100, right? We've tested the heck out of it. So I think it's just like an area where, that process could have taken 6 months in the past, and it allowed us to be more efficient and more prolific. And I think like really raising the confidence in the quality of the data is a big thing. I think data teams suffer from this, where they say, that's going to take 6 months. You guys got to kind of slow your roll. And the executives say like, well, we don't want to slow our roll. Now we're losing confidence in the team that we can't roll faster. So I think that's a great example where, you think hard, you bring your human domain expertise to the table. The AI is great at copying things. It's great at seeing patterns and making prolific copies of itself. So I think that's a great pattern that people can follow for success.
So we've seen success. What are some of the most common maybe mistakes or hiccups that you've seen as organizations have been trying to adopt agentic AI?
Yeah, I think going too fast. I think the obvious straw man is like, Meta has this fabled token leaderboard.
Mm-hmm.
Like we want to see who can consume the most tokens in the organization. And we're like, hold on one second, guys. Like you could just see the recipe for disaster of someone burning through $1 million in tokens. And what did they use the tokens for? They picked the biggest model and they gave it the longest task. And they set it off for failure. I think just, organizations, again, like every time a new technology comes along, big data was the biggest thing in the world for a long time. Mobile was the biggest thing in the world for a while. QR codes all of a sudden came on the scene and everyone was just like, guys, what's our strategy for QR codes? We need to have a QR strategy in this organization. You're like, why do we need to have QR strategy? Right? So we can allow phones to send the Safari browser to a URL. That's all it does. And so when people say like, what is our AI strategy? You got to think deeply about like, what is our regular strategy, right? What is it that we were trying to accomplish? And so I really, really encourage folks to just go slow and think about like, who are your superstars in the company? How can you clear a lot of the brush out from in front of them, right? How can you empower them to be more prolific and do more amazing things and cut out some of the drudgery from their day-to-day work? You're going to see an immediate effect from that. How can we take people who are, let's call it average in the organization? Can we help them become some of those star players, right? Can we maybe give them some of these tools to experiment with? Can we give them a budget, send them to class, give them a little SWAT project where they can go in and they can build something and see success quickly? And maybe Michael, to your point, let's take some of these folks that are below average in their current role. We can move them somewhere else. Let's find a better place for them to spread their wings and fly. But yeah, I think like, keeping your eyes on the prize around like, hey, we're trying to be a successful retail organization. We're trying to get our messaging to customers in a more efficient way. We're trying to get them to buy the things that we are selling. We're trying to make sure our margins have, there's some healthy breathing room in there. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed. We don't know what's going on with the tariff situation, so we're freaking out about what our margins might be. Is there any way that we can kind of, open that up a little bit? So these are really the important things. About how you accomplish them is maybe less relevant. But I just really encourage people to think clearly about what was it that they were thinking about pre-AI, because those things are still important.
So obviously with bringing in AI agents and swarms and just the general workflow changes or potential changes, how can an organization position itself? Because it's possible they would do things exactly the same way they did before they had agents, but is that the right way?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think what we're going through right now as a civilization, right, is this big reckoning to be like, well, what are we going to do with these tools? And what's interesting about them is they don't have an instruction manual. There's no documentation page necessarily to go and read about them, right? You have to go read these white papers where people discover features that they have, these emergent properties. And I'm sure, Michael, you, and I know me, and I know all my colleagues are every single day, they're like, this is an interesting task. I wonder if the agents are going to be good at this. I just installed this thing called Claude Commander, I think is the name of it. and it allows you to just to get on like a race car, right? So it allows you to go really, really fast. You say, listen, I want to create a system to try and solve this task with 10 different agents. I'm going to give them all these different superpowers and like let them run and fly. And I think it's fascinating to see where they work and where they don't work. And it's really frustrating sometimes to go through the process and be like, gosh, I could have just like built these slides myself in less time, right? But you got to think like we need to get used to this new way of working. There's a great tool that this maybe the lowest tech tool in all the AI world called Whisperflow. If anyone has not used Whisperflow, immediately go download Whisperflow. The dictation button on the Mac laptop is not so good. Whisperflow is excellent. You press a little key, it listens to what you says, it filters out the background noise, it learns your intents and your kind of style. And it just puts the text into the chat window, right? It's not really that magical. Oh my God, what a mind shift when you need a task done instead of typing the words or moving your mouse around and pixel pushing slides around a deck. Is you could just say like, hey, that's pretty good. Can you move that over there? Or that model that you built is not bad. It's missing a primary key. And I think for the dashboard, could you try X, Y, and Z? I think that would maybe work better for the stakeholders. What an amazing mind shift to be like, it's time for us to maybe take our hands off the keyboard and see what these agents are capable of. And then you learn over time, okay, it's not so great at this, but it is great at that. I think that is the massive systemic global upskilling that needs to take place for people to figure out what are these things actually good for and what are they bad at? Where are we going to have to go into Photoshop and move, pixels around the page? It's kind of a fascinating time.
So going back to sort of like think of like a bank or an insurance company, someone who's got a fairly entrenched workflow that they've done for 50 plus years, kind of the same. Now they've automated some things. They may have digitized. Now it's on the computer rather than papers they used to shuffle. But all in all, the process is generally the same. Do you think that those organizations are ripe for some changes or updates? Or do you think those embedded workflows that have been there for so long are going to stay generally the same, even with Agentic?
Yeah, I mean, I love this question. The crypto people had to go through this, right? Where they were like, we got to get rid of all these regulations. And then when they had their big crashes, they're like, we need FDIC insurance for our crypto coins. They're like, so you want to create banks is what you want. You want to recreate banks from first principles. A little bit of that is happening in AI as well. You mentioned banks and insurance companies. Cory Doctorow has a great framework for thinking about this, where he goes, you imagine two axes of like high value tasks and low value tasks, and really low risk tolerance and really high risk tolerance. And he goes, brain surgery is really high value, right? But the tolerance for risk is really, really low. We can't afford to make mistakes. If the hallucination rate is 6% or 3% or 1%, somebody might die, right? We might accidentally transfer money between the wrong two accounts, right? We might underwrite the wrong insurance policy. These are major, major problems. If you're vibe coding a to-do list for your personal use on your laptop, that's not very valuable, right? But at least the stakes are really low, right? So I think there's a good chance that a lot of those really high stakes, high value use cases will not be addressed by Agentic. Unless there's some sort of sea change underneath of it where the guardrails can be actually put in place, or where humans can be put in the loop at the same scale. But again, I think it goes back to this question where people say, we're just gonna introduce MCP and tool calling to make the agents behave. And you're like, just want to clarify, you're talking about removing agentic functionality, right? You're talking about introducing Python scripts and removing LLMs. I just want to be clear, that's what we're talking about here. So I think, banks and insurance companies and healthcare organizations have a big reckoning to go through as well, where they're like, is this actually going to work for our use cases? Because the tolerance for slip is almost zero.
So you have that, and then I guess I would argue too, you mentioned the whole token burning part. If I can do something with a traditional Python script or RPA or something else, and then recreate it to burn X amount of tokens in AI, is there a reason why I would do that?
Unless you're so bullish, you're just like, well, the reps were worth it, right? Like I'm better at that thing now. Yeah, look, the tokens cost will go down, maybe, right?
Mm-hmm.
We assume things costs go down. We've also seen the cost of Uber go up and Spotify go up, right? Because once the VCs stop subsidizing your luxury costs, maybe the costs do go up. We've seen token costs go up, and even in the short term. I think the sentiment is that eventually they will get better. I think there is a real value for it. Michael, if you and I are going to learn to use these tools, we know that it is in the future. We know we're going to be using it just more and more in the future. So if a task takes 1 hour doing it the old way and it takes 1 hour doing it the agentic way, you might want to err on the side of doing it the agentic way because, in the future it might take 30 minutes and it might cost half as much money. Assuming that you're not doing brain surgery or transferring money between huge accounts.
Gotcha. All right. So looking forward next, I say 12 months, because we can go out further, but I'm not sure that any of us can see past 6 months, but let's look like maybe 6 to 12 months out. What's going to separate these organizations that are experimenting right now with those that are really starting to embed this as their core operating capability?
Yeah. Maybe we can pick 18 months. The model companies seem to be obsessed with this number 18. Every 18 months, they say white collar jobs will be eliminated in 18 months. And every 18 months, all these white collar people still have their jobs. I think 18 months out, I think like as a software developer, I've been writing code for 25 years. It is amazing to use these code generation tools. I started playing with Snowflake, code, they call it Cocoa, right? It's like Cortex code. It's amazing to develop databases using AI code. It used to take me months to do these things before. I made the analogy of like, an Avatar. Remember Avatar 1? Guy's in like a wheelchair. He goes into the Avatar world. He learns to like run around with arms in his legs. And then he gets on one of those little flying dragon things. And at first he's just like, I'm going to die. I'm going to crash and burn to the side of a mountain. But then he learns how to do it. And I think that's kind of where we are right now, is we have these things that are very dangerous, but they are very fast. And if we can figure out how to use them in the right way, it's going to give us an enormous advantage. And so I think the companies that are figuring this out now, they're really doing the hard work, how to use, again, their domain expertise to get the AIs to like behave, to get them to work for them. Are really going to have a massive advantage. I spoke with a company the other day, will not name their names, and they were like, Tim, I just want to make sure, like, do you use AI in any of your work? And I was like, yeah, well, I can, yeah, if you don't want me to. And they're like, yeah, well, because we have a rule, none of our vendors or employees can use any AI. And I'm like, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. You're going to be like in 18 months, you're going to be a lot of trouble. You'll be way behind the curve. And it's not going to look.
Does that mean they can't use spell check then for Word? Or I'm just curious.
Everything's paper and pencil over there potentially.
Evidently. Oh my goodness. Well, obviously, the stuff is changing at a rapid pace, and I appreciate you bringing your thoughts to bear here, because organizations need to understand what they need to be doing right now to be prepared for this. So I really appreciate you joining us today to go through some of your expertise.
Michael, thank you so much. And to the audience, thanks so much for having me on. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks for listening to Transform Now, the podcast from SS&C. You can find all of our episodes on your favorite podcast channel, as well as YouTube. To stay on top of the hottest topics in the world of agentic automation, subscribe now. The future of work is here.